Thank you for joining us at Intermission. We've just heard the Stephen F. Austin State University Wind Ensemble. And before the UT Wind Ensemble portion of the program, I thought that I would talk a little bit about the repertoire that we're doing. We're starting with a piece that people don't know really exists, in this version anyway, for wind ensemble. This is Respighi's Fountains of Rome, in a transcription which was done by my father, Fred Junkin, in 1982, I believe, to do with his high school band, the Victoria High School Band, which is all kind of amazing. After he passed away in March, when I was down in Victoria helping my mom clean out stuff, we went into this closet and there was a lot of music in there. And I found his original score and parts. I just wanted to show you a little bit about this because it's really kind of an amazing thing. First of all, considering it was 1982, he actually received permission from the publisher, which was not always done back in those days, from G Recording to do it, and also with copies to G Schirmer, so that they were granting permission to do this transcription, because at the time it was still under copyright. I think it's now in the public domain. But he did all this over the course of a summer. And so the whole thing is done. This is all in his hand, of course. So not only, the manuscript, which he used this little miniature orchestra score with, so his marks in here about how he was going to orchestrate things. And a lot of it, you can see, just leaves as scored, and it was mainly a matter of incorporating the string parts into the wind band. But the colors that he got are really quite staggering. So it uses the original harp parts, organ in the third movement, of course, piano, etc., all in the original keys also. So it's really quite an amazing thing that his high school band undertook this, because they did perform it that year. But just the time that it took to do all of this and to write, this is, of course, before Finale, before Sibelius, etc. There were a few fledgling programs, but so this is all obviously in his hand. You can see it really gets exciting over here in the third movement, which is where the most notes are. But this is now we're into the third movement, so you can see just the hours that it must have taken to do all of this. And then not only that, but then to copy the parts, because the parts were in here with it. So every part had to be copied, obviously, by hand as well. So with actually, I must say, pretty great even-handed manuscript. So we've since taken it and had it put into Finale, but I think you'll be pleased with it when you hear it. It's been a great project for us. I'll show you one other thing that I just keep this in my office, but this is a picture of the two of us together. This is my dad when he was president of TMEA, because we're performing this on Thursday night at the TMEA convention, and that's me at the age of, I think, 7, with Joe Linzo, who at the time was the executive secretary of TMEA, and this is John Conley, who is the governor of Texas, because TMEA, I think it was, this was in early January, I think this was taken. And so it was going to be Music in the Schools Week or something like that. He signed a proclamation. But it's an interesting photo because Governor Conley had only been back at work for a week at that time after the assassination of President Kennedy. And you can see that there's a scar on his wrist as we're shaking hands there. And that's the scar through which the bullet passed as he was involved in that assassination. So it's just kind of an interesting photo. Then, after we do the Fountains of Rome, we're going to play John Williams' Escapades from Catch Me If You Can. And Stephen Page, our amazing professor of saxophone, is just killing this thing. So I'm really anxious for you to hear that. And I should mention that Oni Lara, who's one of our graduate students in percussion, plays the equally difficult vibraphone part. Which is really the two of those guys plus our bass player, all the people who are involved in that, I think are just doing a beautiful job. And then Professor Page will have an encore after that I'll let him introduce from the stage. And then we're going to close our part of the program with Michael Martin's Lantano, his Symphony for Wind Ensemble, which he wrote for Mallory Thompson and the Northwestern Symphonic Wind Ensemble a couple of years ago. And this is now the second set of performances that are taking place of that piece. And I'll now let you hear from Michael about that just terrific piece. Okay, well, we're here at intermission, and with our good friend Michael Martin, it's great to have you here. That when I was putting this program together for the Texas Music Educators Association, this literally was the first piece I thought of, because audiences at TMEA tend to look for a couple of things. And one is that I think, generally speaking, they love pieces that they don't know, but they somehow, they view as important pieces into the repertoire, and they also believe that maybe they could perform a part of it at a certain point. And you need something to close the concert that has a big ending. And I've kind of told the story to the group of how you were kind enough to send me this piece, and immediately after I looked at it, I thought, this is a terrific piece. So just tell the story of how this thing came into being.
Well, I'm humbled and honored to have my first TMEA experience ever be with Jerry Junkin and the UT Wind Ensemble playing the symphony of mine. But the inception of the piece, it was commissioned by Mallory Thompson, your good friend,
You bet.
At Northwestern University, which was my alma mater. And
Mallory and I go way back.
and she and I are very close, and I consider her to be one of my greatest mentors while at Northwestern. When I went to Northwestern, I was studying to be a trumpet player, and it was all, it was performance and excerpts and auditions, and she was as huge a part of my successes in getting to play in the Boston Symphony now for the last 8 years, as anyone else there, including my teachers, Charlie and Barbara. And so she was coming up on celebrating her 20th year at Northwestern, and I had been arranging and composing on the side, but quite a bit for the last 10 to 12 years, and I really wanted to offer her something, for her 20th year, and I asked if she'd be interested in a kind of a short chamber symphony kind of thing, and not to close the program or anything, because I kind of wanted to reach out to her again as a mentor to help her,
Sure.
To see if she could help me develop as a composer. And then she was like, well, actually, I want to close the last concert of the year with a piece, so I need it to be 20 to 25 minutes, and it needs to be really big. I was like, okay, of course. And my trumpet player ego said, yes, you're going to do that. And my brain was like, I don't think you can do that because you haven't been doing this that long. But so it came about that way, and I think the reason the piece ended up working as well as it does is my affection and love and respect for Mallory and what she did for me, but also what she's able to do with all of her students, the same way that the impact that you have on all of your students at UT. It ended up, I think, dictating how the piece was going to go, so I didn't even feel like I was creating, it was just already in my head, and I was just putting it down on paper.
Well, I think that's one of the arresting things, but that's one of the reasons that I love the piece, and I don't mean just like it. I mean love the piece is because that comes through in the piece. That you were significantly invested in this. Other than this is no technical exercise or virtuosic display of whatever. I mean this is some heartfelt music that comes through in this.
Yeah, it definitely. The biggest part of that, in addition to my relationship with Mallory for the last 15 years, was she wanted the heart of the piece, quote unquote, to be about her relationship with her biggest mentor, Vince Chikowitz.
Right.
And she was a trumpet player at Northwestern years ago and studied with Vince, and she said he had the biggest influence on her of anyone she studied with through school, to the point where she says every day in any rehearsal or concert or a clinic she's doing that words that he imparted to her always find their way into something she says.
Sure, still resonating somehow.
It's always resonating there, and she always feels like Vince is in the room with her. And she asked that I make that a substantial part of the piece. She didn't specify how. She just said that I'd really love for your connection to Vince as a trumpet player from Northwestern and mine as one of his students. If you can find a way to make the piece a little bit about that would be great. So
which you did in a But even though it's kind of, you could say it's in an overt way, but that overt way is still somehow obscured, so it doesn't become just, oh, there it is again, there it is again, So you might want to talk about that material.
Yeah. So the opening motive in the woodwinds that you hear is da 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 da. That's the beginning of what all trumpet players and brass players know as the Chickowitz flow study exercise. Da 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 da. That we all grew up playing, that everyone's been playing for 40 years, and I think if there's a technique that I'm comfortable with, it's trying to blur things a little bit when it comes to lyrical playing and establishing kind of a canvas against which we can play other melodies or feature soloists or any of that. So I like to have that kind of just that blank foundation of sound that gives a harmonic color and a feel to what's going on, but without you really being distracted by any of the notes. And that's the first notes that you hear are kind of they're mishmashed together in the flutes and clarinets, and that's Vince's melody.
Right.
And then the offstage trumpet solo in the first movement is kind of an elongation and a bit of a expound a little bit on that flow study, and that dictates that, and that's supposed to be Vince kind of to Mallory. He's gone, but still ever present at the same time. And then the brasses bring it back at the very end of the piece, right before the last note, and it's in a slightly different harmonic way, but still absolutely Vince's theme. So.
Yeah, the piece is in 3 movements. The first movement is a big movement. I mean, it's I've even timed it.
It's like 12, 13 minutes.
Yeah, but it is sectionalized in a way which again, and even your section titles speak to this kind of spiritual connection that's going through the whole thing. So it doesn't feel like the piece is out of proportion. 13 minutes and then a 4-minute second movement.
Yeah.
It all feels logical. And that there's the flow, using that word, that should be there.
That was when I finished the first movement. The first movement took like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months to write, and I finished it, and I was like, oh no, I just wrote half the piece in one movement. I don't, where do I go from here? But I'm glad it comes across that way. It feels that way to me. The first movement is, it's, when we've rehearsed it, we get done with it, and I'm like, gosh, that's so much music. That's a ton of, and it's, the first movement is very much kind of the flow of it. I think the journey of it is a little bit about the grieving process, of losing someone that's close to you, we travel through those various stages and emotions and feelings and all that, but I didn't want to rush that portion of it, of course.
Yeah.
And I think that's in that movement is where it's most apparent that Vince's impact on the entire experience for the listener is most felt, I think. So that's, we get to the end of it, and hopefully it doesn't feel like we've been sitting there for a long time, but
I don't think so.
But it but it is, it is half the piece, and then the second movement, which is completely a different direction, functions as a bit of an interlude, and you feel like you get kind of flung out into space, into the middle of all this blackness, and that one's just kind of a technical ride for the players.
Right. Spiral, the name of the second movement.
Yeah, Spiral is the name of the second movement, and just getting to hear the wind ensemble players play that it's awesome. You guys are in for a treat.
Everyone loves it. Everyone loves playing that, though. I mean, it's and not just because it's. It's busy, but it has great colors to it. We were just talking to the percussionists before coming in here, who all are sort of gathered around it. They love their parts. Everybody loves all of that. So the thing I was hoping to bring to the table as someone whose day job is playing for a living, I've played a lot of really terrible contemporary music, and then a few. Well, let's name some. No.
Hopefully nothing by myself, but maybe, but we'll see if I compose more. But then a few really just incredible pieces, and the pieces that in the orchestra that we play that we enjoy as an ensemble the most aren't necessarily ones that are purely tonal or purely atonal or anything. They're the ones that have the most honest connection with what the players are doing.
Right.
You know, no composer plays every single instrument, but if we get a piece of music that it is clear that the composer, in a very honest way, even if he or she challenges us with extended techniques, are not just putting notes on paper for the sake of putting notes on paper.
Right.
So even if it's difficult or extremely difficult, if we feel that connection as players to the honesty and how genuine a composer is and what they're trying to accomplish, whether or not you agree with it, I think that feeling was what I wanted to try to bring to this side of the process, which was kind of new to me.
Well, and you did, because like I said, people love playing that music. And then the third movement, of course, is this big triumphant, statement using the pipe organ you'll hear, in today's performance. But when it was originally done at Northwestern with a massive brass choir, alumni brass choir, that was thrilling in and of itself. But you don't have to have antiphonal brass, nor do you have to have a pipe organ. You can do this piece any number of ways.
Right. I remember when we first talked, when you first called me about doing the piece, you were like, "Now, do we have to use 30 extra brass players
Right.
around the balconies for this piece to come up?" I was like, "Oh no."
Which doesn't work in our hall. So
yeah. And I don't expect most people to carry 60 brass in their wind ensembles. So,
Right.
but it does. It's not necessary for the pipe organ or a lot of antiphonal brass for I think the effect and the intent of the end of the piece to come across. But it certainly enhances several of the moments throughout. But my hope is just with this kind of standard wind ensemble on stage, the emotional intent of everything still comes across.
Oh, I think it clearly does. And it's just, it's so much, the whole thing, when you get to know people, it's all about relationships, and so I think that comes through so much, just Mallory's relationship with Professor Chikowitz, your relationship with her, and then I was just thinking today as we were driving in from the airport that, in your day job in the Boston Symphony, you sit next to Tom Siders, who played in this group here, who, just a few years ago was, doing the same stuff. So it's interesting how all these worlds collide sometimes.
Yeah.
So
the most special thing for me in this collaboration with you is that the piece has taken on a completely new existence and a new life in a way that I didn't anticipate or think, in the same way that it did with Mallory. Once I took it off the computer and printed it and sent it to her, it becomes very much what she interprets it to be, and it's now become very much what you've interpreted it to be, and they're both different and equally special, and so much better than even I conceptualized in my head. I think that's the beautiful thing about creating music and passing it off to someone else that is able and enthusiastic about doing it, because there's just incredible moments in the way you do the piece that I didn't even consider before. You recommending to add string bass and harp, which were not in the original, and now I hear it and I'm like, why would I never have used that to begin with? I can't imagine it without those two things now. It's that's a very small example, but that's the whole thing of making music is it's so unique, it's so special, and
right.
We can't do it without each other, and all of that.
I mean, that's why we both love it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's this whole process. So anyway, I love the piece. I've told you that, and I'm very anxious to share it not only with the audience today on the webcast and in the performance, but also in San Antonio. So it's a real pleasure to have you here. So
Yeah, thank you so much.
great fun. Thanks, Michael.